Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third in a series of Dharma and Justice dialogues from the Thich Nhat Hanh Program for Engaged Buddhism. My name is Peace Twessiji, and I'm the program manager for this program, as well as Buddhism and Interreligious Engagement, which is all here within Union Theological Seminary in the city of New York. So this evening, in this dialogue series, the director of the Buddhist program, Reverend Kosen Gregory Snyder, will be in conversation with a different Buddhist teacher or leader who engages in Buddhist work in one way or another. And this evening's conversation will be with Lama Owens, a Buddhist minister, author, activist, yoga instructor, and authorized Lama or Buddhist teacher in the Kagyu School of Tibetan Buddhism. And he's considered one of the leaders in his generation of Buddhist teachers. He holds a Master of Divinity degree in Buddhist Studies from the Harvard Divinity School and is a co-founder of Bhumi Sparsha, a Buddhist tantric practice and study community. He is also a co-author of Radical Dharma, Talking Race, Love, and Liberation, and his most recent book, which came out this year, is Love and Rage, The Path of Liberation Through Anger. So starting next week, November 2nd, Monday, Lama will be starting a 6-week online course and practice group on Love and Rage, The Path of Liberation Through Anger, exploring different practices offered through the book and more. So I'll put some links so you can learn more about the Thich Nhat Hanh Program for Engaged Buddhism and both of our speakers in the chat in a moment. And I'd also like to say a quick thank you to Ian Reese, who is working very hard behind the scenes to help this event run smoothly, and also to Travis and Pam, our ASL interpreters here tonight, allowing for accessibility for this event. So this evening, Lama and Kosen will explore this. Wise spiritual leadership in our time. To address the needs of our communities in these times, more than ever, spiritual leaders are being asked to act from a deep place of wisdom and skill. However, the appropriate response is not always clear, especially when spiritual training has not prepared many to discern and address the social complexities and challenges of our nation. When considering spiritual leadership in this moment, what are we being called to do or to care for? Or what are we being called to do to care for ourselves and our communities? How do we care for ourselves as leaders? How do we go about resourcing ourselves to make sense of these times? In what ways may we be failing our communities? How do we create harm when we attempt to lead with no understanding of what these times require? So that's a lot to explore. For those of you here in the webinar, note that the Q&A box is open, so feel free to drop questions there as they may come up during the conversation. And note that the Q&A box is separate from the chat. It's easy to get questions lost in the chat. So if you want them to be seen by Lama and Kosen, please be sure to put them in the Q&A box, which should be below my image. And we'll reserve time at the end in the last portion of the evening to respond to those questions. So again, welcome everyone. And now I'd like to hand it over to Lama and Kosen.
Thank you, Peace. And it's so good to see everyone. It's good to be here with you. And I just want to say that Peace is the heartbeat of the Thich Nhat Hanh Program for Engaged Buddhism. This series is because of her, and she is, none of this would be happening without all of her effort, work, and thinking behind this. So thank you again for everything that you do all the time. I want to welcome Lama here. It's a joy to be with you. Always, always, always. And I was thinking about some of the themes we met before this, but we got to know each other doing Undoing Patriarchy retreats. And I think some of the themes that we'll be talking about tonight were there. So it's it'll be fun to go through that. And I'll just maybe we just open up kind of by saying, you and I were talking about earlier about we live in a time that, oftentimes leaders are expected to know what they're doing. Spiritual leaders are expected to have some idea of where their spiritual communities are going, how we're going to plan, what we're supposedly trained in all of these things, and we're the ones who have the ideas and the conviction and the clarity. But we live in a time now more than ever where the horizon line is about a half inch in front of our noses, and it's very hard to know what's going to be happening next week. In this case, next week, quite literally. And so where does that leave us? When we're thinking about what it is to be wise leaders in a time, there are certain truths that are even more bared than normally at this moment. So I just throw that out there for a discussion.
Yeah. First, I just want to offer my appreciation for being asked to be, in this really special sacred space to have this conversation, and I have always enjoyed our dialogues together because I just, feel like there's no bullshit with you.
Thank you.
Right. And we can just say what needs to be said, so I really appreciate that. And I always appreciate the tradition of Union, as well. I wish I could have come there as a student myself. But I'm just really appreciative that places like Union exist, so that we can continue to do this important work. So to the question, there's such a tremendous burden, and I would just say on me to know what to do right now. And I'm exhausted. I have check-ins with people every day, and my check-in literally is me saying I go from one form of exhaustion to another. I am discovering new forms of exhaustion every single day. And somehow I keep going. And that's my teaching, pretty much. My teaching for folks is I'm tired. I don't know what we're going to be doing next week or next year, but I know enough to show up as much as possible to what's happening in this moment. I can show up to my exhaustion. I can show up to my overwhelm, and I can do what I can to hold space for it, and at the end of the day, the answer that I have to everything is just practice, and whatever practice means for us, and that for me, my practice is just saying, you know what? Yeah, I just need to be here, and I need to take care of myself, and I want to be sustainable, for people who need me to be sustainable, who need to see me in the world right now. That's the best that I can do. Any other advice beyond that is fantastic and wonderful, but don't expect that. Yeah, that level of vulnerability right now. And I know that scares people, because I think we look at clergy, spiritual teachers, and we look at them as like some kind of magical creature, that's just kind of getting like a download of wisdom and divination, somehow. And maybe some of us are getting that, but for me, for the most part, it's like, I actually don't need to know what the future holds. I need to know what's happening now in my body and my mind, and I just take it one step at a time, being rooted in what my basic experience is right now. And I just offer that. I offer that to everyone who's tuning into this. I offer this to my students, to my Sangha. This is all I have to give. And
Yeah. Yeah, it's listening to you, I think I don't know if did you see Zenju's poem early on about being brought down to the ground?
no, I haven't seen it.
It was really good, and
Yeah.
and I wish I can't quote it. It was far more eloquent than anything I can say, but it was this communication about just being how the moment is just bringing us all the way down to the earth.
Yeah.
And can we just stay there without, like, don't straighten yourself on your cushion. All over. And be in this place. And yeah, it is that moment of really having no clarity. In fact, in some ways, I would say that believing that one knows any kind of direction would block any meaningful leadership. Because I think it would be a fantasy. It would be a fantasy to pretend that we have any idea what's going to be going on, and that we're going to be able to prepare ourselves for it in some way. It really is this step, which of course the Dharma tells us all the time, but now we are in a well-fashioned box to keep us there. And to be vulnerable and give up even my own internalized ideas that I need to know.
Yeah.
That pop up, and I feel like people are looking to me for that, and it's simply not there. It's not there at all.
And I wonder, because we're both teachers and students, and it's important for me to always situate myself as a student, because this whole, like, I'm a teacher is a whole trap. It's a trap. There's not a lot of freedom in that location, even though everyone's like into trying to get there, right? Everyone wants to be a teacher. Then you get there, you're like, there's just no room.
Yeah.
It was way more room as a student, but as a student, right, what I value is this level of vulnerability from my teachers, right? Where my teachers are like, yeah, this is what I'm going through. And I'm just trying to be honest. And I know that for many folks, to hear their teachers say that is a disappointment, because we think that the Dharma is this magical, transformative thing that, like, if we do long enough, we become superhuman. But I have found that in my practice, it's made me just more human, more basic, more ordinary, but how that ordinariness is so countercultural. Like, we're always trying to get so far away from ourselves, but the Dharma is actually, as in Zenju's poem, it's like getting close to the earth is actually about getting close to who and what we are, getting close to our bodies, getting close to our breath, which is all very ordinary and normal. But at this point in my practice, that ordinariness is so liberating.
Yeah, it is.
It's so ordinary. I'm firmly in my middle age years, and I am just like thrilled to be boring. I'm thrilled to go to bed early. I'm thrilled to, like, just have a quiet, settled, kind of daily activity. It's like, I don't have to hang out anymore. I don't have to go to the clubs. I don't have to do all of this anymore, and it's so thrilling, to be so close to your basic needs, right now. But we have to be willing to embrace a Dharma practice that's about getting back to that basic ordinariness, knowing that, like, yeah, some of us thrive off of the drama, the sexiness, the glamour, but that's the distraction Yes.
Yeah, you make me think about there's this way of talking in Zen where the enlightenment of Zen is supposed to have none of the marks of the Buddha. It's a no marks enlightenment, you know, and it's exactly what you're saying. It's like back to just marketplace ordinariness. And as you were talking, I was thinking, yeah, when I was an early Zen practitioner, I was so impressive to myself, you know, and now I'm so amazingly unimpressive to myself. You know, there's just it's just a day, and there's all of my nonsense with it, and all of the stuff that I do in every moment, which I'm, you know, a lot of it I'm mostly bored with, and you know, it's just there doing what it does, and yet one finds oneself, or I find myself in a role of that being, what does it mean for that to be leadership in a time of crisis, to go through one's day, to speak what you mentioned vulnerability earlier, just to speak one's own real truth that comes out of an ordinary seeing. And that ordinary seeing is quite powerful, because it's ordinary seeing that from where you can say, no, that's not just. No, that shouldn't be going on that way. That's violence, even though we justify it in whatever particular way. But that basic ordinary seeing that comes from a very ordinary heart seems to be able to see and talk in ways that the impressive person wasn't able to.
Yeah. Yeah. But that I think that's wisdom, the clarity that comes from getting into that basic ordinariness. You know, so I think early in our Dharma practice, and I was in the same boat, you know, early in our Dharma practice, and also in mine, it was this, I needed, this is so special, this is amazing, you know, I want to keep this feeling going forever. Like I want the enthrallment, I want the you know, the excitement and the mystery, you know, and that slowly begins to wane. It begins to evaporate, you know, over time. And I remember going through that, where all the sexiness just went away, and I was just kind of thrown back into my experience. And I was like, this isn't the party I signed up for, you know?
Yeah.
But that's when that was the practice beginning to take roots.
Yes.
You know, I know that's the point where many people just kind of like, you know, they split.
Yeah.
You know, they go do something else that's more exciting, you know. But for me, I had to hold tight in that moment, you know, because the Dharma, the practice itself was revealing itself. It was revealing its true face to me, you know, and I had to, well, I just had to see the value of what it meant to come home to this basicness and to turn away from the exhaustion of trying to keep up with something exciting and interesting.
Yeah.
You know.
No, same experience. And it's a painful moment, because we don't talk about this when there's all of this language around waking up from separate self and shedding false identities and all of this. And we don't always talk about the grief that actually is associated with that, and that it's horribly painful to go through watching those parts that that were so impressed with themselves fall away, and that kept us going, you know, kept us going. I in no way want to diminish them at all. They kept us going. And so when they went, you know, as they go, it's painful to watch, and it's painful to experience. And this ordinariness, I'm so glad you brought this up, because this ordinariness, I feel like, is the salve of this moment. As we're in routines that we've lost everybody is separated from the things that that excited them, that kept them going, that filled their day with whatever hits of energy they required to make that. A lot of people don't have access to it, and there's a great deal of pain in people's lives. People are losing jobs, they're losing family members, there's just some cities, like we talked about, New York and Boston. I mean, the cities are just filled with the feeling of the grief of so much. And there is something about being simply ordinary in that and moving through it that is tied to being free. Yeah, it's tied to being free.
Yeah. And freedom doesn't necessarily look like what we've been told it will look like.
Yeah.
As well. And that is disappointing as well. It's complex. There's a level of complexity here that as I get older and older in the practice, it leaves me speechless, you know, and really it makes it difficult to articulate this complexity for others, you know, because you have to be the one who's communicating that, oh, this experience isn't exactly how it's described in the books, you know. It's actually more confusing. It's actually super simple in the books.
I feel like the books are there to trick us into.
They're just like pretty poetry about waking up. You know, waking up is such pretty language, but waking up for me has been super painful.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
When I think about leadership, right? I just think that part of our work is to embody this process publicly with no apologies. Like, I can't apologize for falling apart. You know, like a couple of months ago, I was leading a practice online, and it's like, yeah, I'm holding my trauma as well going through this period. And I was leading this chanting practice, and you know, in the middle of the chanting practice, I completely fall apart. Like, I'm like sobbing, you know? And I have never experienced that before in practice, in public, like publicly leading practice. And I just kind of sat with that, and I was like, oh, like, this is the teaching, you know, is letting myself fall apart, you know. And not even letting myself fall apart. I had no more agency. Like, it just happened. Like, it was no way I was going to keep this, you know, plugged up any longer, you know. And then, of course, you get really concerned about, okay, now people are going to look at me, you know. And then I think for us, we get sometimes this, you know, not us particularly, but like in general, Dharma teachers sometimes get this critique of not having experiences during practice because we may force students to do emotional labor for us.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that is there for sure.
You know, and it's like, but at the same time, I can have this experience of intense grieving and hold space for that for myself.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the difference. Like, I don't expect you to do anything. I'm doing it. I'm showing up to this fully and experiencing this. You know, that's what it means to hold space. You know, and we're not enough of us have the courage to do that publicly, because for me, that's leadership.
Especially in a time when grief is the appropriate response.
No,
and we're in a moment where I feel like if grief is the most appropriate response, if there's not, if we're not talking about grief and refuge in the middle of grief, I don't know what we're talking about right now. You know, you remind me, this is a story we tell a lot in Zen communities, but there's this story of a Zen master who, he had a child before he ordained. So his son grew up, and his son died before he died. And so he's wailing in the monastery, and his students come up to him and they say this, it's such an example of what you're talking about. The students are saying, wait, you understand that there's no permanence, you understand the emptiness of all beings, why are you crying? Because you understand the highest truths. And the father Zen teacher looks at him and says, yes, all of that's true, and yet. And just leaves it there. And I think one question for me always about leadership is what's the and yet that we're allowing to come forward in all of the middle of the Buddhist wisdom. What is the and yet teaching that needs to be here? That needs to show up.
Well, I mean, and yet we're human.
Yep, exactly. And yet we're human.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's like I'm not supposed to have like certain desires given how long I've been practicing, and yet right, and that's the piece that I was referring to earlier. It's like the deeper you get into this, the more it doesn't make sense anymore. Because there are a series of contradictions that begin to arise where it's like, I'm not supposed to be having this experience, but then again, here it is, and I just feel like we don't talk enough about what it means to be human and what humanity is, like.
Yeah, that's true.
Sometimes we come into Dharma, and Dharma just it sounds like we're supposed to get really detached and distant. There's a coldness, that I was really, really sensitive to. And I was like, I don't want to get colder and more distant. I want to get closer. I want to get warmer to everything, right? And I think that's part of what drew me to the tantric side of Buddhism, because it was like, why don't you draw closer to this to figure this out? Even the things that you've been told to avoid, why don't you get a little closer, and figure it out? And that's a hard practice, getting close to the shame, let's get close to this desire, let's get close to whatever, and develop a relationship with it. And that's where it gets complex. Because how do I move through the world being in a relationship to everything? Because doesn't it make more sense to actually push everything away?
If you want to suffer.
If you want to suffer.
Yeah. But yeah, in the beginning, it seems like the suffering happens when you're close, not when you're pushing away. But yeah, and I think, as someone in Dharma leadership, what is it to express? And because there isn't the same, if something comes up in me now that's emotional, it isn't the same as when it did 20 years ago. I'm not actually suffering in the same way. I mean, I'm feeling pain, I'm sad, those things are happening, but I'm not fighting with it, and that to me is the freedom of the Dharma, is for the fight to be gone. Not the emotions to be gone, but for the fight to be gone.
Just reflecting earlier, around, just thinking about this year and the ways in which, on one hand, this year has been incredibly difficult. Just thinking about me, it's been incredibly difficult for me in many different ways, right? But on the other hand, it has been a really good year as well. And it's been a good year because of the ways in which I've had all this time to deepen into the practice in order to hold the heaviness of this period. You know, like if I didn't have a practice now, I have no idea where I would be.
Yeah.
You know, I have essentially fallen back into my practice and allowed my practice to hold me right now. You know, it doesn't mean that I'm no longer suffering. I am absolutely suffering, but it's a different kind of suffering. It's a suffering with more space around it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not, so the suffering isn't a total experience that's completely overwhelming and distracting. That like I can feel the heaviness, but I can also be grateful for things. I can also experience happiness and joy. You know, I can also, you know, think about others and what they're going through, you know, and all that is held, you know, by the practice. And sometimes I don't know how to communicate that. It's just this experience, you know, that I'm having, you know, and I know that people often they want a magic pill,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and I have to deal with that all the time as a teacher, you know. And I used to, you know, when I was doing, you know, public teachings, like I always got these questions in LA or New York. Like it was always at the end of the night, there was always the question, so can you just like give me the basic thing that I need to do, you know? And then I would always get triggered because I was like, what have I been talking about for an hour and a half? You know, and I would always get triggered and say, you know, the basic thing is for you to sit your ass down and look at your mind the same way I had to do for 20 years. There's a magic pill.
Yeah, there's no way around it.
There's no way we can't avoid it. There's no magic potion. There's nothing like that. It just doesn't get better by itself. Like we are all being called to be diligent, you know, and focused and developing a practice of awareness, of knowing, you know, that whatever it means in all the traditions of Buddha Dharma, wherever you choose, you have to choose this basic path of sitting and watching over and over and over and over and over and over again, you know. And of course, you know, for those of us who've had teachers and, you know, been doing practice for a bit, that one piece of advice that we get so sick of hearing, which is, you know, go sit with it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it can absolutely be used as a way to, you know, to get us to, you know, what it can, that instruction doesn't always have, that instruction isn't always delivered in a way that is really authentically trying to benefit the students.
Right.
You know, but the deeper wisdom of that instruction, it is absolutely liberatory and true. You know, that like I do have to sit with something, right? But it's I sit with it and that's the basic practice, but then I am called to do something else after I sit with it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think that some Dharma teachers offer that thinking that's going to pacify you, right? But we have to take a step further and say, okay, once I sit with this, what else?
Yeah, what did I discern?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how do I act on that?
Yeah.
Because for me, I sit with things in order to have agency.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the only agency we're ever gonna have.
Right. Right. Mm-hmm.
You know, with jumping off of what you're saying about the sitting with it, the vulnerability, the leadership, where's ethics in leadership right now?
Mm-hmm.
What's ethical? And this is a huge question,
Yeah.
but what's ethical leadership in this moment?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, well, for me, it's telling the truth.
Yeah.
You know, it's not saying things because they'll sound good or make me look good. It's saying things because that's what I see.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like what I see. It's kind of an expression of prophecy, right? It's like prophecy is just saying, it's just telling folks what you're seeing. That's it, you know, what's happening right now.
Yeah.
You know, even if people won't like it, you know, but I'm still called upon to tell that truth as I see it.
Yeah. You had said something earlier, I'm going to forget exactly how you phrased it, but you had said something about you linked together the capacity to tell the truth. This was in an earlier conversation, the capacity to tell the truth and inspire, but that can't happen until there's a certain work that you do first.
Yep. Well, that's how I often see leadership, is through inspiration. It's like, it's part of my role is to inspire folks to think differently, to do differently. But I can't do that inspiring if I haven't done the work for myself.
Yeah.
You know, and I think a lot of people in spiritual leadership, to an extent, they've gotten really good at faking it. You know, and I think about the wider mainstream field of, like, you know, spiritual leaders and practitioners. There's a way in which you create this kind of smoke and shadow thing where, like, you look really good, you know, like the branding is wonderful and you're like pretty to look at, you know, and like all this stuff. And we get confused and we say, oh, that's spiritual maturity, that's mastery, that's leadership. You know, no, it's just like great branding, you know. And I think a lot of those folks are really being tested right now, you know, because they actually don't have the capacity to meet the times right now, you know, because these times are even consuming whatever illusions we can throw out there that's previously helped us but no longer are effective.
That's the truth.
You know, and because we're as individuals are experiencing this level of trauma that isn't pacified by like Jedi mind tricks anymore. We're calling for real, authentic, liberatory teachings.
Yeah, we need more than an evenly modulated voice.
Yeah, no, exactly. Right? You know, it's like, no, I don't want an appetizer right now. I need a full meal.
Yeah.
That's the level of hunger that I'm struggling with. I need a full meal, and I need people who can offer that kind of nourishment. But that nourishment comes out of our depth of practice.
So what's the work that needs to be done? When we talk about, because I'm with you completely on this, like there is a way that we need to inspire, but that inspiration needs to come from a depth of work and realization that in many cases hasn't been done for a moment like this.
Yeah.
What's that work?
Yeah. The work. I mean, it's the work is just practice. It's not glamorous. It's just practice. And it's figuring out what our practice is and doing it. But it's also it's more than just practice, it's lineage as well.
What do you mean by that?
So lineage is like, okay, what is this continuation of teachings that I'm taking refuge in that has proven to be resilient and sustainable and authentic? You know, how many people have practiced that before me, right? And have they also proved it to be liberatory and authentic and sustainable? Or did I just go to like a week-long class on mindfulness or, you know, energy work and come out of that class calling myself a teacher and a master, you know, with no accountability to someone who is themselves an authentic teacher, instructor, or mentor, you know.
I didn't expect you to go that direction, but that's really important, because what I'm hearing from you is like, and I feel this too, is like in a time like this, the strength of ancestry is everything.
Yes.
You know, like one's spiritual ancestry and being able to live into that, both in terms of study, in terms of like felt in the body, walking around with that and with those ancestors in you is it bolsters us. And for me, makes me able to speak in a way that my own tiny little being would never be able to do on his own.
It's speaking with the consciousness of my teachers. But my teachers spoke with the confidence of their teachers, and their teachers spoke with the confidence of their teachers. So I'm like actually speaking through the channeled confidence of this entire lineage that I've been trained through. And it's like a concentration. It's like I get this concentration of teachings, you know, and then of course, like the hard work is unpacking that, you know, because my job is to interpret these teachings for the time and place that I show up in through the intersections that I'm occupying in terms of identity.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think that intersection you're talking about, the temporal intersection of lineage and the spatial intersection of this moment, you know, of I'm receiving a lineage, a heritage of a lineage, and I'm bringing it to this moment. That is some of the work that I think is hard work to do, because it's one thing to say, okay, I'm reading about a particular practice and I'm going to talk about that practice in its stripped down form. It's another thing to say, I'm going to bring it to social unrest, social injustice. I'm going to bring it to a pandemic. I'm going to bring it to, you know, what is it to put some meat on those bones in the moment, right? And that work is not necessarily provided in detail by the lineage. We have to bring that together with other teachings in this moment to make sense out of that.
You know, and so we have to be of multiple lineages.
Yeah, we do.
Then, you know, not just the spiritual lineage, but you know, the lineage of activists, the lineage of great thinkers, the lineage of people who have figured out this relative systematic reality, you know, and I can bring that. And I think that's what both of us, you know, that's where both of us come from. Like we were trained in like the social Dharma, you know, and then we met like this like sacred Dharma, spiritual Dharma, right? And I think our work has been about bringing these two lineages together and creating this language. You know, which is for me has been so nuanced and precise, you know, and I started that bringing together, you know, really on my own, and I met Reverend Angel, you know, who was the first living embodiment of what that looks like to live an integrated lineage together, and the work that went into that, you know, because these are two languages that we have to be fluent in.
We really do.
You know? Really, you have to, you know, and that's just like time and effort and practice and being told over and over again that you're really not a Dharma person, you know, because this justice thing isn't Dharmic, you know, and you have to make a choice.
You
have to make a choice. And
you're too opinionated, you're taking sides, you're too loud, you're too, I mean, it goes on and on and on.
You're so political. The Dharma isn't political.
That's right.
You know? And you have to practice through that. Yes, it's confusing. Yeah, I've heard that early on. I'm like, oh, maybe I am.
Yeah, the doubt does set in sometimes.
You know, the doubt comes, you know, and then you look out at the world and you say, but isn't the point of Dharma to reduce suffering and harm and violence? And if this social teaching, like if Audre Lorde helps me to do that, isn't she therefore Dharma? You know? But the Buddha didn't teach Audre Lorde. You know, it gets really intense, like the ways in which people are arguing against us, you know. Well, if the Buddha didn't say it, then how can it be Dharma? You know, I was like, well, were you there when the Buddha was teaching, you know?
We
Like,
have we don't know what the Buddha said.
the sutras are secondhand gossip. Well, they even started, well, I had heard.
The gossip tradition, it's true.
I think the Buddha has said this, when he was walking to use the restroom. I think he gave this teaching. It's like,
let's call together a council and figure it out.
But, at what point do we begin to do this profound liberatory practice of saying, okay, if this teaching reduces violence, it helps me to experience spaciousness and freedom, can we just consider this Dharma?
Yeah, and what do the traditions have to offer each other that take us to, I don't want to say a greater Dharma only in the sense that it is a Dharma for our age. It is a Dharma that includes more, in its language. I mean, the Dharma ultimately includes everything, but the justice tradition, the social justice tradition, and the Dharma, they both inform each other in a way that, at least in my experience, makes both of them more nuanced and more powerful and more appropriate and less harmful. And that's been one of the most, like you said, it's a nuanced exploration. It's a very exciting one, Yeah. And that's the leadership I'm excited about right now, is the leadership that can bring that together in a way that people can hear, because like we always say, it's not a turning the wheel of the Dharma until people understand it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That leadership too, it's again, just reemphasizing, it's an embodiment, and not everybody's going to look the same.
Yeah.
When they're deeply embodying Dharma. And that's a misconception, because when I came into practice, I thought, oh, the result of this is for me to be really quiet and meek and agreeable.
Yeah.
Because everyone else was, right? Like everyone's really quiet and meek and agreeable and really, I was like, okay, let's do it. And I could never get there,
Yeah.
and then it dawned on me, it dawned on me only because I read all these stories about these masters and these yogis and these, bodhisattvas who were just off. Like they were just like doing this stuff. And then you read those stories and then you say, maybe the point of the practice is for me to become more myself.
Yeah.
But also the closer we get to awakening, the more countercultural we become as well. And that explains some of that behavior, of course, but of course, it's always like that fine line in terms of like, okay, do we just excuse things that are, harmful and just say, well, it's the enlightenment or the wisdom of the master, So that's where it gets tricky. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's a whole nother conversation and too about how do you draw those lines and set those boundaries? How do you, what's the difference between wisdom and harm?
Mm-hmm.
And I've been there and done it with my teachers.
Yeah.
It's confusing.
It is very confusing. What's so-called skillful means crazy wisdom, violence. Yeah.
Is the teacher just being skillful, or is the teacher trying to get off?
Yeah. And sometimes it gets even more confusing when there were times when I had really necessary, profound insights from a teacher acting in a certain way that I think was really kind of, they were stuck in their ego, but it still had an effect on me that was positive. So it's just, it's a mess. And but listening to this and there is something that's coming together about this, about the connection of, which I don't think is a connection that we talk about in this way so much in leadership, which is ordinary, truthful, countercultural, saying what one sees. It's a very direct way of being in the world. and even easeful, even in one's outrage, at appropriate outrage, a kind of easeful directness is there too. Of, yeah, it's appropriate to be outraged in this moment, and this is the way the world is. This is the way the world is right now.
Yeah. I know that's hard for people.
Yeah.
You know, it's hard to accept the world right now. You know, considering every single day there's something heartbreaking happening somewhere in the world, if not here.
Yeah.
You know, like forget about any worlds in the world. Like it's too much for us living here in the United States every day to deal. You know, and I get it. You know, it's so easy to get overwhelmed, and you know, and I walk that line as well. You know, but these are the places I get into that's hard to articulate, but it's this knowingness after all these years of practice that like this, I see and experience the chaos of the world, but I know that this isn't the truth. There's like something else, you know, like there's another experience that I'm trying to have.
You know, this moves us close to the conversation of self-care and nourishment in a time when as a teacher, there's a lot coming at you from students, coming at you from the world, coming at you from other teachers, coming at you from people who want you to show up at this conference and that conference, this speaking thing and this, you know, and it's just every direction. And yet we are human beings. So where is that? And not only where is that self-nurturing, self-care nourishment, but how do we even train in that? Because I can say for myself, I only learned it. I'm only learning it by complete failure. By failing again and again and again at understanding my own limits, at holding to the idea that it's not too much, it's just something that I haven't figured out yet how to handle, and going with that stream of thought, you know. Yeah.
Well, you know, I think for me, it's this path of care for myself has only been illumined because I have fallen out of care, you know, into overwhelm and into burnout. And we know what that looks like for teachers.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's ugly.
It's ugly. It's painful.
Yeah.
You know, and I think when you hit that burnout, that's also the time in which, you know, really severe ethical misconduct starts to happen, you know, because you start manipulating the spaces around you, the Sangha, the students, to get these basic needs met.
So true. That is so true.
You know, and I know, you know, I tell people all the time, it's like the self-care that I'm trying to engage in, this is keeping all of us safe right now. You know, and I also say that, you know, that I know now that there's Lama Rod and then there's Rod. You know, and I think for teachers, like we need to be very clear about the difference.
Yeah.
You know, between the public, our public self and our private self.
Yeah.
You know, and just be and for me, it's been about doing the work to link the public and the personal together, you know, but also doing the work to understand that like this public persona is something that people are creating without my consent as well, you know. And so I have to be resilient enough and aware enough to be able to not get trapped into what's being created, you know, into how people are telling me who Lama Rod is.
You know, it's so, this is a tricky thing. in the Buddha Dharma and Buddhist practice, because we're given this idea that if the self is fully dropped, if I'm not attaching, I'm kind of like this, and I there's no difference between the private and the public, right? I'm just who I am all of the time because I'm not attached to self and so on. And that is really dangerous territory, because the longer I'm in this, the more I realize that I need my private self. I need to actually not be in the teacher role and because for me, in a way, being in the public, I live in a monastery, so in some ways I'm always in the public if I'm in terms of the teacher role. And so the realization that there is that I need actually the space to rejuvenate, to come back into that. I need to go off alone and be just me.
Yeah.
And that actually isn't some sort of failure of awakening.
Yeah.
It's what it is to nourish oneself, to return to one's role. Yeah.
I had this experience like 2 weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago. I had gone to this store on the other side of town here, and just like walking through the store, shopping, doing whatever, doing grocery shopping, and then someone comes up to me. They're like, "Oh, you're Lama Rod." And
You just have to go to Montreal now.
They're like, "Oh yeah, I follow you on social media," and they'd come to a teaching before. I didn't recognize them, initially, but I was like, "Oh, like this is part of it. Like people are watching me in public, and just doing grocery shopping, and but how can I even then just be myself?
Yeah.
Like to be in the world and know people are watching, but choosing just to be myself and not to be the teacher in that moment."
And in what ways, this is the student practice that you referred to before, in what ways am I letting who I am and the ethical precepts that I vowed to maintain inform each other all of the time?
Yeah, exactly.
So that I can that my natural self is an ethical self. It's not like I'm needing to be an ethical self in public and now I'm going to go off and do whatever I'm going to do, but that I'm letting the natural self and the ethical self be that. In some ways, if we understand the precepts as we talk about them in Mahayana, that they are the expressions of a bodhisattva, then our natural self is our precept. It is our ethical self, and what is it to live that out as a body with some ease and spontaneity? Yeah, it's an interesting question all the time.
People will start watching more and more and more, in the same way I watch teachers in public when they think no one's watching.
Yep.
So I want to see how their practice shows up in the mundane.
Yeah.
Or if they're going to be different than who they are publicly in front of people.
Yeah, bamboo tube, what we call snake in a bamboo tube. You're always a snake in a bamboo tube. Maybe it's time that we hear from some folks.
Okay.
Sound good?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay.
Thank you so much for that conversation.
Sure.
Yeah. It's been really, really lovely to listen in, and so many questions have come in. I also want to let folks know, I forgot to do it at the beginning, to let you know that you can raise your hand to come on screen in order to ask a question yourself. And so I see some people have done that already, but in order to do that, if you need instruction, you would go to the participants button at the bottom of the screen here, and then a pop-up will come on the right hand part of your screen, and at the bottom of that you'll see a blue hand, and you click on that and it'll notify us that you have a question and would like to come up. And as people are formulating and thinking, I'll ask one question that somebody's typed here in the Q&A box. It's a juicy one. And it is this: could you say more about your work around patriarchy and how it relates to leadership? What will it take to create a different type of men's movement than the ones of the alt-right leaders, for example, Jordan Peterson, and the one that they're creating and is growing at warp speed among often white young men, and including Buddhist circles. So how do we pool what you are doing in the Dharma world around healing the masculine out of marginality, and given this urgency of the moment?
You want to start that one, Rod?
Yeah, well, it's not just the alt-right and the Jordan Peterson movements, it's also these other men's movements that are really about intensifying this experience of the masculine, and giving us just one version of the masculine, calling it a healed version, or like, a gentle version of masculinity. I even have a problem with that as well, because I think for me, I use contemplative practice in order to figure out that, I don't know, healing the masculine is about letting go of needing to be labeled anything, and like actually trying to express a more authentic self that's just really about reducing harm, reducing violence, being connected, and in tune to the world and the space and the community around me. I don't know, I don't know what masculinity is anymore, and I think that's good. I'm just trying to be myself. And I'm trying to do what helps me to feel in tune and connected to people. And I'm trying to get feedback from the world that's telling me when I'm not in tune and connected, and taking that seriously. Like, I don't have to be labeled as a male or a man or masculine at this point in my life to feel connected and in tune and grounded right now. I mean, this also speaks to the ways in which I'm moving into like gender non-conforming space anyway, and a non-binary space as I get older. But I want Dharma practice, and this is what we were working on too. We were doing this Undoing Patriarchy that was about using the Dharma really to tune into these basic expressions of who we were as people, not trying to fit into a system, but just trying to be ourselves in the world beyond labels that gets us into trouble, or it makes it through labels that are confusing and hard to work with or fit into. So
yeah, I was thinking when I think about that, there's something for me that comes up that's very important about connections to the earth. And that I don't have, when I understand, there's a lot about traditional formal masculinity or toxic or however, or spirit, even like highly patriarchal spiritual forms of masculinity. They're very transcendent, overpowering, dominating. And and there's, I don't know, the word cradle comes up. There's something about living in the cradle of the earth in a very felt way, where I don't feel, the earth doesn't ask this of me. The earth doesn't ask me to obsess on my gender, doesn't ask me to, that's humans. Humans do that. Human society does that. And when I feel into the patience and the patience, I mean, I feel a deep patience in the earth with me as a being, and acceptance there that's complete. And so whatever is squirming around in this body and mind is whatever expression it is. And there's no question I've been conditioned from day one, gendered in a particular way, and I'm not going to suddenly flip into something else. You know, there's a karmic trajectory here that's in place. But there were also things that were there that got pushed under, that are able to come out now. A certain quiet, gentleness, shyness, vulnerability, ability to not know, to be okay with just like, I don't know what the hell's going on here. Like ways that the way that I was traditionally gendered just didn't allow for any of those things. So I feel like there, what I don't see in these men's movements is a return to the earth. I mean, I have a very felt experience that my women ancestors are in me as much as my male ancestors, or however we want to categorize it, that they are in my body and they are supporting me at the rib cage. And so what's it mean to separate off into that kind of masculinity when that's the case? It's not a real and meaningful thing. So it's that going back to ancestry, all of our ancestors, that going back to earth. I think this has to be foundational for a different kind of thinking about, if we're going to use the word masculine. And I agree, I don't know that I know what it is anymore. But if we're going to use that language and do something different, I feel it has to involve that going down into the soil and in being children of the earth. Yeah, that's what comes up for me. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you both. I'm going to ask one more written question before inviting someone on screen, and that is just for the two of you to say a little bit more about, like, what is Dharma practice for those listening who are less familiar?
I mean, just basically, it's just, for me, Dharma practice is me doing this labor of developing awareness of my mind and of my body, you know, developing this knowingness, you know, through consistent effort, you know, over and over again, you know, and getting this data about who and what I am, and then choosing different ways of being in the world to reduce harm and suffering and violence. You know, that's really all my Dharma practice is, you know. And meditation is the primary vehicle that I use to train in this awareness, to figure out what's happening and what's going on.
I'd say that sums it up for me. I have nothing to add to that. Yeah.
And it's not glamorous or interesting. You know, meditation was really hard for me to do. You know, when I chose to do it, initially it was really hard, but then I found myself in a situation where I had to do it because, you know, so much stuff was happening and I was overwhelmed. And so I had no more choice but to sit and watch my mind. And that changed practice for me, absolutely. You have to commit to it, though. You really do, to see the changes that you want to see.
You know, and just one thing that I'll just say on that is the stability of mind that comes to a practice like meditation, or some kind of practice that you pick up that stills and stabilizes the mind. This is really key, because it's hard to see. It's hard not to be caught up in our own conditioning and see from the conditioning. We have to like sit down and be able to kind of step back. And that stepping back sounds easy, but is actually takes a lot of practice to really step back in that way and look at one's own mental conditioning and bodily conditioning. But yeah, it's a lot of seeing, a lot of awareness.
Hi, Greg. John here.
Hi, John.
Hi, Lama.
Hey, John.
It's wonderful to be with you both. I found myself sort of chuckling throughout this conversation. My wife is sitting on the other side of the table asking, why am I laughing so much? And I'm laughing because you both are just sitting there saying like, oh man, you know, we're screwed. A time of suffering. And, you know, and it's no different really from me than anybody else. And the way that you're able to hold that, obviously is part of the answer to the question I'm going to ask is, I mean, that it makes me laugh is I think part of what you're trying to say about Dharma practice. But the way I want to ask the question is, you know, I guess, what is the difference between the suffering of the Dharma practitioner and the suffering of the non-Dharma practitioner? And I mean, we've been told, talking rather as a layperson, that the answer is that there's some kind of selfhood that's been exploded or blown up in some way. And you guys are kind of disabusing us of that. But I'm not totally sure you are. And so I could use some help on this question. But thank you. It's just been healing to be with you. I don't think I've ever chuckled much in, you know, as people say to me, oh, we're all just collectively screwed. It's really hard out there. Well, thank you.
No, I mean, so much of my practice is laughing at my suffering. You know, because I get really serious, actually. Like, you know, people find that really surprising, but I get super serious about practice and I take myself really seriously, you know, and I get really focused and I have an agenda and, you know, I'm like, I have to be awakened by the end of the day, you know, and I get really wrapped up in that. And then I start suffering a lot more. And then the only way to break myself out of that is to laugh at how ridiculous I am, you know, just to let myself just like look at the ways in which I got caught again, you know, in a cycle of attachment and fixation on all of this, you know. But I'll just answer this small piece of the question, and that piece is that you ask about the difference between suffering of a practitioner and the suffering of a non-practitioner. Well, what I can say from my practice as a practitioner is that I'm practicing to choose the discomfort instead of always pushing it away. And that choosing actually helps to protect my energy because I'm not wasting energy running away, pushing away, avoiding. I'm saying, there you are, welcome. You know, you're gonna hurt like hell, okay. You know, and I'm gonna trust my practice to consume this chaos. When I say consume, I mean that I am going to show up, not react, and allow the space to hold everything that's coming up for me and engage in that struggle, you know, of contracting, then realizing I'm contracting, and opening up again, and then contracting again, and opening up again, and then laughing at the whole thing at the same time. So that's what I would say. That's what I would offer.
deeply moving. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would just say, you know, I was thinking when you're making this distinction between practitioners and non-practitioners, which is fairly blurry. It made me think of Dogen, and he has this very succinct line where he says, "Those who have great realization of delusion are Buddhas, and those who are greatly deluded about realization are regular folk," right? So the people who think they know what realization is, they're the ones who are confused, and the ones who have a lot of realization about being deluded, they're the ones who are Buddhas. And I think that's it's a very clever turn of phrase, because I think that's the reality is that it is the joy, sense of humor, spaciousness that Lama Rod's talking about, like letting one's pain come up in space, in spaciousness, rather than it's mine in this very small way, in this very contracted way. Like, I am being attacked by this pain. I'm the one who's suffering. This is it's not personal. And I think that's the big shift, is none of this is personal. Life isn't happening to me. Life is happening, you know, and a part of life is going to be my heartbreak around the world. It's a big part of my life. You know, in fact, even when there's never any end to the heartbreak. And if anything, I think I feel it more than I did before I started. I did everything to avoid that feeling before practice. So we sit with the arising heartbreak, but there's so much play and so much dynamism and so much spaciousness. There's also room for joy. There's room for laughter. It's all there. There's room for the whole thing, because none of it is personal. You know? And that is, that's the closest thing I know to freedom. Yeah.
And then when you're ready, you can ask your question.
I just started my video and I am unmuted. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
My question is, as a lay person, so I'm not making any assumptions that I know anything. If you are working very hard to get to the awakening phase, and you're becoming much more aware of the suffering in the world as well as within yourselves, do you ever take action to help the world and relieve suffering, or does it stop with the conflict that you are going through?
Yeah, it absolutely, I think we take action in the world, you know, because for me, when I am more aware of my own discomfort, then I'm also beginning to be aware of other people's discomfort, you know, and then so much of my understanding of Dharma is that I am being called to interrupt suffering, myself and others, you know. And I think that's an ethical responsibility right now for everyone. Actually, right now in the world, is when we see suffering, we ask ourselves, what can we do right now? Because we live in collectives, you know, in communities and so forth, and we have to be responsible for each other as much as we can, at least, right? You know, to an extent that is appropriate for us, absolutely. But I suffer more when I'm not doing anything to alleviate the suffering of others around me, you know.
Yeah, I would think it would be frustrating if you didn't act.
Yeah, you know, even though we sit still, I only understand the Dharma as the activity of alleviating suffering. Everything that I do is the activity of alleviating suffering. Even if I'm sitting still and watching my mind rise and fall, it's an activity of alleviating suffering. I'm engaged in it always. I don't know that I understand it any other way, especially in the Bodhisattva tradition. At one point, when there's enough clarity, the heart turns toward the world. Yeah.
Well,
Thank you so much for these. I'd like to read a question that has come in, and it is, how do we discern who is a real leader and who is just the branding and fluff? Is it something we only know by going into depth ourselves, or are there common red flags?
what do you think, Greg?
So, it's funny. I think this kind of jumps back to a couple of questions ago, but I think there's a sense of, this is clearly not the only thing, but there's a sense of humor about oneself. There's is a leader conforming with there's a lot of things I could go down a checklist and say, is the leader conforming to the ethical agreements of the community? Yeah. There are, are they hiding things? Are they secretive? Do they have double standards for themselves and other people? There are lots of things that do they only speak? Can they never relinquish their position of authority in any situation, no matter what it is, even things they know nothing about? There's lots of things like that I think we need to just pay attention to, because we might be dealing with somebody who hasn't worked out some things, but humanness is a big part of it. Letting our humanness come forward. It's hard for me to talk about leadership outside of Dharma leadership, because I think people would talk about, maybe they would talk about political leadership in a different way, things like that. I don't know. But those are some of the thoughts that come up around feeling into Dharma leadership. Ron, I'm sure you have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, I would just add to, I just, in my practice, when I'm looking at someone, in the realm of Dharma leadership, there's a part of me that's like, that has a sixth sense about authenticity. I can sense that, oh, you're being yourself.
Yeah.
And you're not trying to get it right necessarily. Like there's a messiness as well, which I look for. Like, is everything really neat and clean? Yeah. I think you also, I listen to their teaching, right? I listen to whatever they're offering, and I investigate, and I say, okay, is this actually helping me to experience more freedom, openness, spaciousness? You can tell over time when one's offering teachings from a place in which they've worked that teaching out and really deeply embody that teaching. Like, you can feel it. Opposed to someone who's just like telling you about the teaching. Here's this teaching. Go watch your mind. That's the teaching, but when someone who's deep into awareness of themselves and their bodies and their minds, when they're saying, go watch your mind, you can feel the weight of that experience. Like, they've done this, they're doing it. There's a vulnerability to that sharing. Like, it's almost as if you get to glimpse the weight of that practice, when they tell you something simple like that. I don't know. It's just, these are things that like I have no like empirical proof or data to like substantiate this, but it's just feeling. It's just intuition, that one develops over time. And not to say that like these really gifted teachers and authentic teachers aren't doing something harmful on the side either, because that's also the case. That was the case with my teacher and my community. There was a lot of harm happening. But also the teachings were really real and transformative. If they weren't, then I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be alive. So that's the part when I talked about earlier, that there's a contradiction and there's a complexity here. This is part of it. That people can be really harmful, but also really realized at the same time. And that's a hard thing to wrap your mind around. Even the presence of that kind of like dual experience, extreme experience, really repels people. They say that, how can that be possible? How can it be possible? No matter how enlightened we get, there's always a human shadow. I think sometimes that's the trade-off. It's like there's a human shadow that has to remain in order to communicate with us, to communicate with others. The ego, the ego doesn't disappear. If the ego disappeared, then they couldn't communicate the Dharma. Like there would be no communication after that. Sometimes we've called those people insane. Not all people that we label insane has actually been insane. Maybe they've actually been awakened and they've lost connection to this realm. So I don't know, this again, complexities. This is why I spend my time thinking through. But at the end of the day, I just come back to my practice. I come back to watching my mind. I come back to reducing violence for myself and others. I collect feedback from the others around me that helps me to deepen my practice, and that's all I can do.
Thank you so much. It is 8:29 and at the end of our time together, I've really appreciated your vulnerability, your honesty, and the conversation and responding to the questions that have come up. Thank you, Lama, for being here and participating in these dialogues, and of course, Kosen for leading the program and skillfully inquiring into these important topics. So I'll leave it to the two of you for the goodbyes for the evening, but thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Lama, for being here, and thank you all for coming. These are always, I always love talking with you. So it's really a joy to be together again. And we won't be having another one of these conversations till January, which I believe is January, Peace Vimusar. Yes. Okay. Good. That's that'll be then, and thank you, Peace, and thank you, Ian, and thank you, everybody, Travis, and who else am I forgetting? Pam, for supporting us tonight in this. And Lama, if there's anything you want to say, closing out.
Yeah, I'm just offering my appreciation to everyone, to the interpreters, to Peace, for just getting all this together, and Ian, and my appreciation to everyone who's shown up tonight for this dialogue.
Yeah,
it's been really special, and I always enjoy our time together as well. So.
All right, everyone, please take good care of yourself in these times. We'll see you some point in the future. All right. Bye-bye. Good night.